Hey, good evening, everyone. I'm John Matola, Chairman of the Board of Finance Audit Subcommittee, and welcome to the September 11th, 2023 meeting. I see that we have members of the committee, Charlton, Mary Claire, Kathy Simpson's here from HR, First Select Board, Brenda Kupchak, Finance Director Jared Schmidt. In the audience, we have Chris Axel, members attending. So what I would like to do is just briefly go through what we hope to cover tonight. It might be a lot, so we might have to possibly do a follow-up meeting sometime in the near future. I think really first item on the agenda, which is a discussion, question and answer session with town officials regarding human resources administrative investigation on town issue credit card purchases and related issues regarding town policies on town issue credit cards. I think I know the committee has some questions about the investigation and how we got to where we are today. I think we need to understand those issues before we move on to the next step. My understanding, Jared and Brenda, is that you, at some point, I don't know if we'll get to it tonight, do want to present a presentation of what the town is doing subsequently after the report was issued. And, certainly appreciate that. I want to hear about that at the appropriate time.
Yeah, I just want to, we put together a presentation because we thought, we took the time to put together a presentation because we thought it would be helpful in sort of an overview for the subcommittee and understanding where we were and what we're doing now. Because obviously that's what I think we're all focused on is what are the solutions, right?
Okay.
And I would assume that the presentation will probably answer a lot of questions, and that's why we wanted to give you a presentation. And it's not really long. It would eliminate some of the questions that were already put together for.
All right, let's see where we're going and hopefully we'll get to that tonight. I know that I don't need to hear the presentation from Kathleen Simpson again because you gave it at the Board of Selectmen meeting. I know Lori was at the meeting and Mary was at the meeting. I watched the entire meeting, and so I'm up to speed on that. So we'll probably just dive into questions with respect to that and see where we are. But before I start, I wanted to just ask my members, Mary, do you have anything you want to say before we initially jump into this?
It's okay.
Yeah. Okay. All right. And Ms. Charlton, do you have anything you want to say before we start?
I do.
Item one?
I do. Yeah, I'd like to make a statement for the record, about this committee's role and the role of the Board of Finance related to tonight's agenda. And I'm speaking partially in response to public statements that were made by the First Selectwoman to residents in town through a newsletter that I found to be misleading and somewhat troubling. So just as background, my role, on November 21st of last year, my Board of Finance colleague, Chris DeWitt, and I received an email from a resident, Ms. Dana Carey. Ms. Carey indicated that in the interest of following up on an audit report she'd heard presented to the Board of Finance, she'd emailed a request to the town's CFO to review copies of the town's American Express credit card statements. She made her request on September 12th. Had received some credit card summaries, but after multiple follow-ups, the town was unresponsive in providing the detailed information she requested. Ms. Carey indicated to us that she had a number of concerns about credit card usage, and she intended to file a state with the Connecticut FOI Commission on the basis that the town unreasonably denied her access to the documents. I forwarded Ms. Carey's email to the town attorney and asked that her request be honored. It seemed reasonable. It was obviously in the town's interest to avoid the cost of a legal proceeding, and her concerns raised some red flags in my mind. All of this communication timeline is documented in copies of emails that are included in the backup to the meeting. After I contacted Attorney Baldwin, the town finally responded to Ms. Carey, and she was invited to come to Town Hall to view the documents she asked for, which she did in early December. Ms. Carey informed me that she spent about an hour reviewing those documents, and within an hour identified a number of potential issues and brought her concerns to town officials. A few weeks later, on December 29th, Mr. DeWitt, Mr. Matola, and I were invited to a conference call with Attorney Baldwin and Ms. Simpson, and they told us that as a result of the issues Ms. Carey brought forward, they were initiating an internal investigation. Ms. Simpson estimated the investigation would be completed in 30 days, and she committed to making a report to the Board of Finance when it was done. Obviously, the investigation didn't get completed in 30 days. It continued to drag on for many months, and during that time, Mr. DeWitt, Mr. Matola, and I each followed up periodically with Ms. Simpson to understand the status, to ask questions. And we had a number of reasons to be concerned. For example, during the same time period, our board was being asked to approve the annual operating budget and other material capital projects, and we had no idea if our decisions could or should be impacted by any issues the investigation was identifying. Ms. Simpson responded to us promptly with appreciation for our questions, but let us know on each occasion that the investigation was taking longer than anticipated for various reasons, and that she couldn't provide details until it was completed. In light of this, I was both surprised and disturbed to read Ms. Kupchik's newsletter sent to the full downtown distribution list that claimed that there was, and I quote, undue political pressure from certain individuals looking to direct the investigation through consistent inquiries and criticism of the process timeline. And she also stated, I cannot stress enough the importance of conducting a thorough investigation and not a politically expedient investigation. I find these statements to be offensive and false. I realize the wheels of municipal government turn slowly, but it should be obvious that when an investigation is promised in 30 days and the report stretches out to 8 months with no proactive communication, there's going to be follow-up. The implication that our concerns were political in nature is especially absurd, given that the concerns were raised by members of our board from both political parties. So my hope is that this kind of defensive rhetoric, self-serving rhetoric will be put aside this evening. And there will not be an attempt to treat legitimate questions from elected officials as, as being political. I want to see that end. We're all here in service of the community. I would like the town leadership to respect that. We should stay focused on the facts and the most important implications of this investigation. And as I alluded to during the Board of Selectmen meeting, the most important issue for me is not credit cards. Credit cards constitute a small amount of our town spending. It's about the extent to which these same financial control issues extend beyond credit cards. And we have plenty of evidence, including from other audits that have been done, that they do. So I want to thank our chairman for his diligence in ensuring that we had an opportunity to meet tonight. And for pushing back on attempts to limit the time allotted to our discussion. I think we need to ask her questions, and we need to have time to do that until everybody's got their questions answered. And I do look forward to learning more this evening, and I thank everyone for being here. Thank you.
So, Mr. Chairman, as ex officio member
Sure, go ahead.
of the Board of Finance, we probably could have done the presentation in less time than the statement. However, yes, the HR director was prodded a lot. So just to be very clear, I was not aware of any FOI requests until I received one FOI request from Ms. Carey. And I called her up promptly and said, why are you making an FOI request? I've known you for over 20 years. You're more than welcome to come in here and look at anything you'd like to look at. She came in and she looked. The minute she started pulling some things, I went across the hall to the finance department. I got the CFO, I got the HR director, and I got Connie Saxel. I said, come on in, sit down with her, talk to her, find out what's going on here, because I'm not aware of this. And we opened up an investigation. Yes, Kathleen decided to go back 5 years because 5 years was something she wanted to do, kind of to have a reference point and then go forward to see, is this persuasive, is this fraud, widespread, all of these things. Listen, listen, I'm here as a courtesy to this board. Kathleen Simpson is the HR director. Jared Smith is the CFO. Report to me. I was elected to run the town. And I know sometimes that's a little hard for some people to swallow, but I was. And the bottom line is, we're here as a courtesy. And to say that we are not wanting to answer questions or not be helpful, I'm always wanting to be helpful. But, you know, it's a little difficult when you open up your social media and people who are making statements are bashing you every single day on social media. It's a little difficult to take that person seriously as far as not being political. Putting that aside, I am the leader of the town. I don't engage in political potshots on social media. I find them ridiculous, unproductive, and I'm not even going to go into it.
Okay,
So we came here tonight with information to share with this committee. And to be very clear, we are just as concerned about the financial controls of this town, which were a complete and utter disaster when I took over. And so, talking about what happened in the past, we could sit here all day and talk about that.
So
That's not important.
that's fine. But
What I think we should talk about is an overview. We put together a presentation
we're
to,
not going to do that.
What we found-
We're going to stop.
and I think,
This is our meeting.
No, it is.
And we're
Again,
gonna move forward. We'll get to your presentation later.
John,
Well,
I'm
gonna
not
say one
asking,
thing.
I'm not asking to do the presentation.
Point of order, sir, says.
But it's, no one did a point of order for the last 6-minute speech, and I'm in about 3. So I would like to continue.
No, you're done, and we're gonna move on. You're gonna move on.
John, I'm here as a courtesy. If you want us to stay here at this meeting.
Responsibility. This is not a courtesy.
No.
It is your
No.
responsibility.
Yes, it is my responsibility to run the town. It is not my responsibility to, do you find this amusing?
I do not find it amusing, and I never said a word of any of this on social
Brenda, we're
media.
gonna move on, all right?
We just, in the interest
The
of moving,
bottom line is,
in the interest of moving forward, can I
this,
just-
all right, let's just be really clear. This was an investigation, not an audit. If the audit subcommittee wants to order an audit into the credit cards or any other matter, you can work with the finance department. You have the funding to do that, and I would welcome it.
Okay,
I would 100% welcome it.
Okay.
thank you. You have something to say? We're gonna move.
Yeah, I just, I did not say a word about this matter on social media. If you were concerned, Ms. Kupchik, about questions we were asking, you could have picked up the phone and called. You decided to disparage me and my fellow members on the Board of Finance in a town newsletter. You never asked me a question. You never spoke to me. The news calling, and so
Said
let's move on.
there were prodding.
No, you said undue political pressure. There's
Did
nothing.
I say it was from you?
Who else was it from?
Did I say it was from you?
Okay,
Okay, let's
this
move
is
on.
getting ridiculous. Let's move on. All right.
So we're on item number 2, discussion, question and answer session with town officials regarding human resources administrative investigation on town issued credit card purchases and related issues regarding town policies on town issued credit cards. So what I would like to do is open it up for committee members to start asking questions of Ms. Simpson, Jared, Connie Saxel's here. I see Caitlin, Buddy and Posse. And as I said, we heard the presentation. Kathleen, thank you for that at the beginning of August, I think at the Board of Selectmen meeting. So I think we're ready to ask some questions about that. So I'll turn it over to Ms. Charlton first, and then Mary, turn it over to you, okay?
Okay, thank you. So Ms. Simpson, I'm going to start, this executive summary I think is new, correct, since the Board of Selectmen. Okay, so I'm just going to
Sorry, that is correct.
follow through this. Okay. And the first question I have is your description of the methodology. And you say the investigation began by sampling credit card statements and reconciliation records for these 5 years from the start and midpoint of each year, et cetera. Can you just clarify? You went back 5 years, but how much did you look at? Did you look at all the statements for 5 years? Did you pick one statement a year? Did you keep any statistics on the number of transactions you looked at? Can you help us understand that?
Sure. What I did is that there's 2 things going on. There was parallel investigation with a WPCF employee. And that one was a deeper dive into all the statements within a period of between 2019 when he took over to 2022, which was at the end of the fiscal years. I got this investigation in January of 2023. So having gotten that information, I got some, I'd spoken to a previous superintendent who contacted me directly and said, hey, you may want to look at what was going on prior to that, because it's very similar to what the practice was in that department.
And I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but specifically, I'm trying to understand, how much did you look at?
Okay, I'm trying to get there. I'm sorry, and I'm not trying to get there with.
Yeah, I did hear your report previously, so I understand the background and I understand the junk thing. I'm really just trying to clarify the scope of your investigation.
That's what I'm trying to get to the scope. So I want to make that a similar scope within the other credit card holders based upon, to keep it consistent with that. Obviously, we could not go through every single statement with every single credit card holder. So while I was focusing on that investigation, I had Ivana Ventoyak, who's the HR paralegal, and Joanne Cordemuch, the labor relations specialist, who I think support making sure I have good staff. And they were pulling things, and they started realizing if we go through every single solitary credit card statement from 2018, 2022, we are never going to get this done. So I said, well, let's just pull things at like the beginning of the calendar year and in the middle around July, and take those and just grab those type of.
So 2 months a year, roughly?
Yeah, roughly. And then sometimes when you look at the folders, they would say December, but they were, it depends upon how people submitted them. So from there, I said, look at whether or not there's a justification on the reconciliation. If there was justification, we pulled those aside, and then we took those departments from the time period that had no justification for the purchase. And I did not go forward into the ones that had justification to see that really was a real legitimate reason, or if there's an inventory that I could find that the item, if you will. So I went from there, and then I asked those credit card holders and or the department heads, depending upon what the situation is, if they signed off on it, what was the reason for it, and then we went through the questionnaire.
Okay, that's helpful. So it sounds like if you looked at 2 months a year, we probably covered 15% or so of the volume, which is fine. I mean, many samples are smaller than that. And then of that 15%, you went further in those months only if you didn't see justification for something.
Well, I would say that of all the departments, I would say, like, for instance, the library would put what the reason they bought it for, or maybe Parks and Rec would put teen drama or something. I didn't question whether or not they really were bought for that, but there was something at least to go on with that. They put.
There was a description.
Yes.
So as long as there was a description, you sort of accepted that and you focused on things that had no description.
Correct. We're correct. And again, looking at some of the stuff with IT, and it was the same old stuff, like, not shouldn't say, but it was like
No, I understand.
obvious things like that. Some of the other ones, there was no reason.
Okay, so, and those that, and this is what I'm trying to get to, because I am trying to contrast to what would have been done if an audit had been done, which I think is fairly different. But you looked at things, if they had a justification, you didn't dive further into that, you focused on the ones where there was no justification. And I'm asking this based on looking at all the emails that were in the file. For the number of them where there wasn't a justification, it sounds like you asked the department head, what was this for? And they responded. And I mean, what was the process? Did you just accept it if the response was reasonable, or?
Yeah, I would ask them to say, particularly if it was an employee said, my department head authorized it and said it was okay, this is why. The department head said, go further, the department said, yeah, I authorized it, or gee, this is why. Or if they didn't know why, like, for instance, some of them weren't there in 2018 or 2019. So then I said, well, if you can find out if you could find out whether or not this is something that would be something you would buy, because there's patterns, right? A lot of times people are buying the same type of services and commodities. So.
Okay. And the reason I'm asking, and you can look back at our DPW audit, I think there's, generally we make a distinction between something where it's justified or it's clearly not justified, or we can't tell. So if we asked a department head, did you authorize this? And they said yes. It doesn't sound like there was really a way to validate that.
Well, I did ask reason and they would.
Right, but you're taking, in other words, and when I say validate, there's not really evidence. You're just accepting that. If they said, well, you know, I bought all this food because we had meetings in the department, there's really no way to validate that. You just have to take their word for it, right?
Yeah, or you didn't go and say, I bought like, you know, all these things for this project. I didn't go, let's go find them now. Where are they now? I did not do that.
I understand. And again, the reason I'm asking is, and I'll go back to my memory of the DPW audit report. I didn't refresh my memory, but there were a fair amount of there was a fair amount of stuff where the auditor concluded that they just couldn't conclude because there was no contemporaneous documentation. And that gets to sort of the overall conclusion. It's not that we didn't find anything, it's just that we don't have enough information really to know.
I think that what it was, and I guess the standard, and maybe I can better explain that too. My goal was looking at for violation of that code of conduct
Understood.
or fraud, which is a very high standard. Yes, there were violations of the policy all over the place. I mean, obviously, people were not following things, and that's true. And again, having gone, and it was taking long to get this done, it was incredibly long, and I was very naive thinking it was going to take 30, 60 days, but it's a lot more work than I thought. And I appreciate auditors and what they do because honestly, it's a lot to go get through the mission. I did not, when I was looking at these things and I was taking the department head saying this was for XYZ, or we do these repairs because we have this fleet or we have this, jet ski, for instance, the police department. Okay, then I took that on face value.
I got it. And the reason
I think it was fraudulent.
here's part of the reason I'm asking you, this wasn't presented in the Board of Selectmen meeting, but I heard statements made to the press that we had quantified the amount of financial impact as something like $20,000.
That I think that Jared could speak to better because I'm sure.
And I get it. And so
That's important, the 20,000.
yeah, well,
because
why I'm going there, okay, is for this reason. I'm trying to understand because if $20,000 is quantified based on the sample you look at, then the actual number is much bigger. You sort of have to extrapolate from the sample. But so the $20,000, what exactly, and maybe Mr. Schmidt, this is for you. When you came up with the $20,000, what was in that bucket? Was it just the obvious things like we paid sales tax we shouldn't have, or what was in there? How did you come up with
So
that?
just, can you clarify, because it was misreported, the $20,000 was not what
We
was
didn't,
found.
we didn't report that. That didn't come out of our outfit.
Reported it, so
It was.
a large part of that was the donations of the fire and police department. So they would buy something on the credit card and then it would be reimbursed by their funds. So scholarship fund, and then the fire department has their fund. So that was those were not appropriate. Shouldn't be using it, but so that was kind of captured. The real number was much lower. So, and that would include paying sales tax, things of that nature. Do
Do you have a real number?
No, I think
What
that we determined based on all the records that Kathleen went through was that the number was going to be small. The $20,000 was the number of any of the questions that Kathleen had asked of department heads where it wasn't clear or there wasn't a rationale. Like that seemed like low hanging fruit for finding things where there would be problems with the way the money was spent. So that's what was what she focused on. That added up to, based on the report that I saw and the details on the report, it correlated directly with all the specific purchases that were in the backup, in the 900 pages of the backup. And so and there was nothing that we said, nothing that came out of the administration saying that this money was misspent. The only thing that was what was quoted in the report was that there was 21,000 that was misspent.
Okay, so we still don't have an actual quantification.
So that was the amount that was called into question. And as Brenda's talked about, most of those items, with small exceptions, that we were given the rationale and provided additional backup. And there was no problem. It was within the policy of the credit cards.
Based on the statements that were made by the,
Statements and backup and.
was backup, okay.
Right.
Well, I mean, if it's a statement about rationale, and that's what I'm just trying to distinguish here, because again, I don't know if it was 2,000 or 20,000 or 120,000, but you can't really get to the dollar amount unless, if you have a bunch of items that you can't conclude on, or if the basis for your conclusion is just taking the word of someone. I mean, and I'm not trying to accuse anyone of anything, but let's, if someone came to me and said, why did you buy all this food? I'd just say, I have meetings. I mean, what am I supposed to say?
So I'll give you one example of one of the items that was on there. I believe it was $450,000. When there was an investigation of a resident because there was suspected abuse of animals, and
Remember the hotel thing.
right,
Yeah.
and the police determined that that residence was inhabitable, and so we have the town has a requirement to put those the people living in that residence up somewhere, and so $450 was used to put them in the High Hope Hotel. So that's an example. It's not something that was misspent. It's just something that we needed more clarification on. And that one, as well as a lot of the other items, we were given information like that, which is totally, it's legitimate. We can back it up. There's receipts. So we do have a lot of backup for a lot of those items that were called into question.
Okay, yeah, it was more the rationale that I was asking about, because again, you may have backup, which includes a receipt, but the rationale when it's not provided timely, if you have a meeting or you have food charges or whatever, I mean, most organizations, you have to put who was at the meeting, what was the business purpose of the meeting, et cetera. So we didn't have any of that. We would just ask and they would say, yes, it was a meeting, and we concluded that was legitimate. I'm not trying to be critical. I'm just trying to understand what we did.
I think that to your point, which you're right, like a lot of, because of the fact that for whatever reason, let's just say, they weren't putting the agendas together. They weren't putting that information in, and it wasn't being kicked back saying, hey, you don't have this. So you know what, I'm not gonna, why make more effort, put that in there, or I don't know about that, I'm supposed to do that, so.
No, I understand.
Clarify though, you went back 5 years and most of that was from the prior years.
Yeah.
I mean, and I think it's important to know, and I was hoping that we could focus on the changes we're making, because I think that's what this committee is supposed to be focused on, right? What changes are made to rectify issues that happened over a course of years. There was a culture of just emailing out a policy, never saying, hey, John, did you get the policy? Please let me know that you read it. Or can I just finish?
That's not it.
Or a training involved. There was no training of any of our employees on how to use their credit cards, what they were supposed to do. And when this all came about, and we had our department head meeting, which we have regularly in this room, and Kathleen and Peter went through the whole, like, here's what we found. And this was early on in the investigation, but became apparent to Kathleen that we had no policies or they were very loose. So without compromising the investigation, she and Peter and Adam held a very good meeting in here with all the department heads and explained what their responsibilities are, what they are supposed to do. And then there was a lot of good questions, and it was a good long meeting, but you could tell that these people literally were like, I didn't know that. Sans Clary going, I didn't know that I was supposed to say. I mean, people thought Sans Clary was, using hotel rooms during, but it was because for, people who are evicted. So these things, you can't, it's hard to fault people who were never trained appropriately in the policies. And so now that we've had this, which I thought was a very good exercise, this entire thing, because it allowed us the opportunity to see a problem, which many have been here, and rectify it and actually strengthen it, right? Strengthen that policy even stronger and give trainings, all of our employees to date now. everybody, right?
Okay.
Can we-
All right, yeah,
been
we're gonna-
trained.
We're gonna move on. I appreciate what you're saying. You're
Okay, I just, yeah, and maybe this is a good segue because, there's
And you'll get to this.
those statements are not consistent with my understanding. They are not consistent with what has been reported to our committee and to our board for the past number of years. So I do want to follow up on that. And they're not consistent with some documents that have been shared with us. This notion that there were no policies or no training or that people didn't understand. So I certainly think things can be approved, but let me ask a couple things here. So, you made reference to the 2020 audit that was done by Ms. Saxel, who is here. Hi, Connie. And I was on the audit subcommittee when that audit was reported to us. It was also reported to the full Board of Finance. And everyone, received the report. There were a few good questions, sort of expressed their appreciation to Ms. Saxel. I didn't hear any unusual questions. No one seemed confused about what the recommendations were. But in any event, it says here, the auditor's findings, and I assume this is the 2020 audit report, were not shared with the first selectwoman, her chief of staff, or the chief administrative officer. Even hypothetically, if they had been communicated to individuals other than the CFO and purchasing director, the audit did not pinpoint critical issues that could have been promptly addressed to mitigate potential ongoing liability. And, I want to, and I'm glad Ms. Saxel's here, but I'm not sure I agree with that. And I also think you're making a statement of opinion here and treating it as a statement of fact. So the audit did not pinpoint critical issues. We have the audit report in our backup. I went back and listened to the meetings where it was presented. So I guess the first thing I want to ask, and maybe Ms. Axel, this is for you if you don't mind. Maybe you can talk to us about your process, but that audit.
Can I explain though what that meant?
Can I ask her a
No, I just want to
question?
actually, because I just want.
Hang on, there's
I
a
just want to, okay, I understand. I just want to make sure you
Okay,
understand.
let's try to be.
I'm actually, stop it. I'm running the meeting.
I just,
You're gonna be able to
I
explain
just
it.
want to make
I
sure
have a
it's clear
question
that I
for
want
Ms.
to.
Axel.
I just want to clarify because I wanted to make sure that you understand. I was not criticizing the audit. I was indicating that, and I will explain it later, the findings and what she.
I understand. I understand what you wrote
I
here.
don't think they were
Understand what you
saying.
wrote.
Okay, and I also want to explain why your statement that it's an opinion, which I will clarify for you afterwards. That was
Because I
not a
also
question. That was
have an opinion, and we can kind of go through these.
Okay,
'Cause I
all
think
right.
they're fairly straightforward, but Ms. Axel,
Question for.
can you just, and maybe as a process, I don't know if you remember this specific report or not, but I know you have a process for when you do your audits, who you kind of review them with. This credit card report, I know this was issued in February 2020. There was a transition going on. Who did you review that report with?
At that time, I reviewed the report with the interim chief fiscal officer, and that was Ms. Caitlin Bossy.
Mhm.
And I reviewed the report with the former director of purchasing, that was Gerald Foley. We also discussed the report with the chief administrative officer, Mr. Tom Bremer, at that time.
Really? Okay.
Yes.
Did you? Okay, because it says something different here. To clarify, did you discuss it with Mr. Bremer or did you just get a copy of it?
We discussed the report with him. I can't recall if we actually physically gave him the document, but we did meet in his office and discussed the findings, and he agreed that strong measures should be imposed on violators of the credit card policy. He was in full agreement that stronger policies should be put in place. As a matter of fact, as a result of our discussions with Mr. Bremer, he had instructed me to conduct a credit card survey. He felt there were too many credit cards outstanding and he wanted to reduce the number of credit cards at that time. So I had conducted a credit card survey and we were able to reduce some credit cards, not a significant number, but we did reduce the number of credit cards. And that was based on the department's assessment of need.
Okay, and so you took feedback from Ms. Bossy, who has been here a long time, is familiar with these processes, and you also reviewed this with Mr. Bremer, and any feedback you got, I assume, I don't want to put words in, but you incorporate feedback before you issue a final report?
Yes, yes. I do discuss the report with the department head, the CFO, and any addition to the report, any further, if they want me to increase my scope, if they want me to look at something further, include something in addition into the report, I do more test work, more, research, and I incorporate that into the report as well.
Okay. So and just from a protocol perspective,
Follow up on that. At the same time as that was going on, we were also reviewing the Public Works audit report.
Yes, we were.
And it was my understanding that you were meeting monthly with department heads and Tom Bremer,
Yes.
working on revising
We are working
policies.
Together on the DPW independent report and trying to follow up on the independent auditor's findings and recommendations, trying to act upon them, remedy some of those findings, and to increase internal controls.
yeah, I remember that as well. Yeah, I
think though it's really important though to note that in February of 20, late 20, early March of 20, the town was dealing with a global pandemic. And so I know it's hard for some people who weren't running a town or working in a town government situation, but I can tell you from somebody who lived it, it was a gut punch like none other. And we had to, I mean, there was a fire hose of executive orders coming out of the governor's office. We were basically on lockdown. We had to decide how to manage town government. We weren't like other towns who just shut their doors and sent everybody home with a laptop. We stayed here.
That didn't happen in other towns, Brenda, but go ahead.
It did actually happen. It happened in Trumbull,
we're in company.
actually.
Go ahead.
However, I don't know what date was the report that you finished in February of 20?
The date of that was February 5th, 2020.
The finished report, the
Right.
questions were.
This is right.
Okay.
No, but I thought this was a dialogue. I didn't realize it was a one-man show. I would just like to, listen,
This report was issued we got this a few days ago, so I guess I'm questioning because this same narrative was also in your newsletter. This says that, it was only discussed with the chief fiscal officer, and Ms. Saxel has just told us that it was also discussed with the chief administrative officer, who reports directly to Ms. Kupchak. So what I'm trying to understand here from a policy perspective. Okay, and let me just get out my question.
I didn't say discussed in the report. I said that it was shared, the actual report was disclosed. I didn't say discussed.
Well, that's a little bit of a fine line, but the reality is, Ms. Kupchak didn't know about this, okay? She didn't know about this. I take her at her word. She didn't know about it. I'm trying to understand the protocol, I assume, would be for Ms. Saxel to share this information with her boss, who is a direct report to the first select woman, and she shared it with two individuals who report to Ms. Kupchak. So I think that the proper protocol was followed in terms of communicating this. It just seems like it didn't, somebody didn't think it was important enough to.
No. And you know what? Actually, no, John, to tell you the truth, John, enough.
No,
Nobody didn't think it was important enough.
Well, why didn't they tell you?
A state of emergency, Lori.
Emergency
You
wasn't in
understand?
place in
So
February.
guess what?
Yeah, that
Audits
was-
were not top of mind. Yes, no one shared the audit with me. Are you enjoying this?
All right, stop.
I mean, honestly.
Order.
No, wait a minute. Are we here to talk about solutions for the town of Fairfield, about what was uncovered in this investigation, and audits that the committee is going to
commission, but I'm not gonna, I mean, listen, this is the Lori Charlton show, and it's quite obvious. And this is pot shots at the Kupchak administration, because I was supposed to know about a credit card investigation. I was supposed to know about all the problems that happened over the last 20 years in town government.
Well, you should have known about this. 'cause
Yeah,
you've been
you're
involved
right,
for
you're
3
right,
years.
John. I should have known. I had notices of violation sitting on my desk, unopened from October from the Department of Environment.
Stop.
No, John, it's not inconsequential, okay? I took over a town mirrored in a public corruption scandal. Don't roll your eyes, because it's a truth. And you weren't here, and you didn't have to take over a town dealing with the crap I had to take over. So you know what? I'm here to work with this committee to clean up this problem and any other problem we found from the last 20 years. But I'm not gonna sit here and have some political statements how the Miss Kupchak should have known, and why didn't she know, and why didn't she do this, and why didn't she do that? Because you know what? That's political nonsense. Okay, so either the committee is serious about talking about what are the solutions? Do you want to even look at the presentation that we worked on about how we're doing, how we're making changes? We're just gonna sit here and talk about who should have known what when.
Please.
1 second.
Oh, please, this is not about real governance. This isn't about governance, and you know it isn't.
Mr. Chairman, can I please make a comment?
Yeah,
It really doesn't do a service to the town to be screaming. What we are trying to get out is solutions.
Well, here they are, Nancy. If anybody's really interested in them, here they are.
To make a statement, which is.
No one wants to look at them. They just want to make statements.
Wait until we understand where we've been. And
Exactly.
I think the
Exactly.
community is
Exactly.
owed the answers and the thoughtful discussion. And we can't get to the solutions until we have that, until we hear from anyone. And I'm really exhausted, as I'm sure the community is.
So are we.
To have everybody, to have the administration say something is political and they're pot shots. When people don't agree with the administration,
Oh,
it
please.
is not a pot shot. It is an opportunity to express concern and point of view.
These are accusations that I should have known something, okay, 4 months into my administration.
It's now.
Now, we came here, we're trying to behave professionally, putting together this document that shows what we found and how we have made changes. Is anyone interested in that at all? Or are we just gonna sit here and make statements?
Differently. If you speak louder, it doesn't change.
Nancy,
The content.
Nancy, thank you, that's very
We're
helpful.
all done. Kathleen, here's a question for you from me, based on, here's the issue. Your executive summary says the auditor's findings and recommendations were not shared with the first selectman. That's true. We think that's true. Her chief of staff, I guess that's true. But then it says, or the chief administrative officer. That doesn't seem to be accurate based on what Connie Saxel just said.
That's the first time I'm hearing of that, but do I?
Ask Ms. Saxel if she shared it with.
Could you?
Go, ask.
Please let me finish. Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you. I'm trying to help. What I would explain with the sharing it, I was talking about the actual audit report. There was only sent to the interim CFO and to the purchase director at the time. Now, I'm not saying that Connie did anything wrong. There was no protocol in place to send, I just want to make sure it's clear. There was no protocol in place that I could tell that says, hey, when you have an audit report, you need to share it here, here, and here. And I have to say too, that there's a lot of transition going on. So I did not know that there was a discussion. So sharing is a bad term. So I thought I put disclosed report. So that's not my intention, was the actual report. All I saw on here was where it went. I did not know about other discussions, and no, I did not. Hindsight's a wonderful thing, right? I did not go to everyone and say, did you have a discussion about this?
Yeah, the reason is I think it is important to get this factually accurate. And there's a narrative in here, which is not exactly subtle, okay, about how this occurred. And so I'm just trying to understand it. So, and let me just.
Can I just say something too? I don't know what that means.
I'd be happy to explain
I
it.
just want to say something that when I did this investigation, I did not talk about it with Brenda. I did not talk about it with, I basically did the investigation. I looked at the information. I came to conclusions. And I understand there might not be an agreement with them, but I was not getting influence or getting suggestions or asking, what do you think? And I didn't go as far as interviewing everyone and say, hey, did you have discussions with this? Did you go farther? I really was more focused on how come this did not how come it sat where it was in February? And COVID was another piece, which I did not put in there. So I was looking at why did it not get shared anywhere else, or the actual report, or could have been done differently?
I
And I
hear you.
think from HR, from a risk management, probably a good idea to have the audit reports, be if they involve employees particularly, come there to look at, should there be discipline, should there be other controls put in, that we should put in policy. So I just want to indicate that that was not, and again, I can rip apart an investigator's report, Ted, and I get that. So,
Listen we're not ripping the report apart. We're asking you questions.
no, I get that.
Concerns about it. And we just want to make sure we understand how we got here.
I understand.
That's why we're asking.
Can I ask a follow-up question? Yeah, because again, I am concerned because I was on the committee and I remember these things. So Mr. Bremer was involved, understood these things. This report, and I looked at your timeline, this report was also provided to the full Board of Finance. I don't know if you're aware of that.
Yeah, no, I do. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
And Mr. Schmidt was present at that meeting.
I'm sorry, the report, my investigative report.
Wasn't working. He wasn't working.
Excuse me.
I'm sorry,
He
which.
wasn't working.
It was in 2021 and he was at the meeting. It's on tape. It's in the minutes.
How was that helpful?
Talking about,
It's helpful.
How was that helpful?
talking about the internal audit report from the county.
I'm trying to, because here's my point, okay? And then we'll move on. But here's the issue, okay? We have spent more time talking about a guy who spent $14 on, cold medicine than we've spent understanding why an internal audit, a pretty significant audit got done. None of the recommendations were implemented. And no one was held responsible for not implementing them. And when I hear that no one knew about this, the reason I'm asking is I know that this is factually inaccurate. I was at meetings when these things were discussed with people that you are saying didn't know about them.
Okay, all right.
So that's why I'm asking.
All right, well, first of all, again, let me go back again. I looked at who was put on the report, the actual audit report.
Yes.
Yeah, February 2020. I did not do a deep dive in who was in meetings in 2021. I did not do that. So I'm not trying to massage something and hide things. I did not know that. I did not know, again, I saw what was presented there. And then what I meant about maybe things could have been detected. When I saw the audit report, and again, maybe I'm naive, I don't understand audits. My thought was if specific areas were identified, like WPCF, which was really comparatively way more lavish spending, if you will, than I could see from other areas on an ongoing daily. So that, just so you know, that what I saw there when I met with Mrs. Carey, that was very hair on fire, going along with some travel stuff.
Right.
So, right, when you say that, so my thought, maybe and I didn't mean to be critical, of course, I'm not trying to say, because I'm not an auditor, indicated that maybe if those specific areas were identified, like this is going on here, this is going on there, my thought was, well, maybe that could have stopped some of the bleeding there. And again, I don't know what Connie looked at specifically, because I don't have all the exact things she looked at. And again, this is no criticism of Connie's action. I don't.
Kathleen, my name's not on that report either. The
No.
Board of Finance is not listed on that report, but
Okay.
clearly we review it and we hear about
Okay.
it. So the point of who this was copied to, I don't think is relevant. I think my concern, really, because this goes beyond this, and I will tell you, I know we're supposed to get on this agenda to some of the other internal audit reports. And my concern is that we heard this report, we've heard many internal audit reports. And we hear that recommendations have been implemented. Department heads have agreed with them and they've been implemented. So when we find out that that's not the case, that people claim they didn't know, that nothing happened, and it sounds like these audit reports are going in a drawer and gathering dust, I have a deep level of concern about that. I mean, I understand that there was a lot of time spent on other aspects of this, and from an HR perspective, I respect that. But we had again, you talked about you made reference to Mr. Bodie. This was an individual who was put on paid leave for 3 months, subject to a police investigation. And the end result was, we paid back $800 or whatever and got a warning. But the much bigger issue to me, is that these audits are happening and no one's paying attention to them. Because I gotta tell you, we've had some, I believe, substantive and serious things reported to us in these audits. And when we hear that the recommendations are being implemented, we're relying on those representations. And now, the reason I'm asking these questions is I'm not so confident that we should be relying on those representations. That's my concern. So just so you know, that's why I'm asking this. This report came to the audit subcommittee in June 2020. It goes to the full, Ms. Saxel reports to the full Board of Finance annually. So because this happened in February 2020, it didn't come to the Board of Finance until March 2021. But Mr. Schmidt was there. I did go back and look at it. He and others complimented Ms. Saxel on the great job she did. We were assured that these recommendations were implemented. We did. And again, I remember raising the point, I raised the point at the meeting to say, okay, Ms. Saxel, you're telling us they've been recommended. Do you ever have an opportunity to go back and check? Do you ever re-audit these things? And the answer was, no, I don't have time to do that. I've got other things on my plate. And that was what led to the concern about the scope of her job. Okay, just so you know. But I do believe that that is the more serious issue. And that's why I'm raising this, because, it's whether it's a cultural thing or whatever. Even this year, we've had half a dozen audit reports that really warrant another look, and they're the same types of issues that we have here. This is not a lot of money, but they're the same types of issues that are popping up elsewhere.
I get it. I get what you're saying. I'm just saying that I focused on a very small piece. And my scope was very limited to see whether or not there's a policy violation in terms of the code of conduct. And
Okay.
that was my task at hand. And then also look at, well, wait a minute, who knew, what if anything could have been done in terms of who knew,
I got it.
then about particularly, and I'm not focusing on the WPCF one particularly, but that was a huge part of this, with respect to how it started, if you will, or from.
Understood.
Do you want to ask some questions on this area?
So I guess there's a few areas
Sure.
where I guess I'm a little bit confused as to how it came to you to review this and not someone like Connie Saxel, who typically does internal audits. Is it because it was a personnel matter?
Yes, because it was because under the fraud policy, HR director is like pretty much all over there and has to be involved with it, and that's fine. But what happened is when it got to that level, you're right, because it was an allegation of many employees potentially engaging in fraud. It then became, when the policy goes into the HR bucket.
So I'm going to follow up on that. If we have internal auditor goal is different than an HR investigation, you would agree with that?
Absolutely, yeah.
So I would imagine that if someone like Connie does an internal audit and there's some findings that raise suspicion, would you agree that that such a internal audit needs to get to human resources for a review at least?
Yes, that's why I think we put in Gerald and I did some recommendations together, and that's one of the things, because when you're looking at that, absolutely correct, because when you look at potential fraud, criminal, civil, for reimbursement and for disciplinary up into including dismissal, because it's not enough to say, and to your point, Lori, too, about like, oh, okay, the department said it took care of it. Well, how did they take care of it, right? It has to have an HR looking at it to make sure it's done consistently, that we're really, really doing something about it with now that, especially now that everyone's on notice, now you've gotten your training. Now no one can say that they don't know, particularly now. Well, then it should be going to HR if there's some, and maybe also too for controls, because certain policies should be updated and revised when you find things, right? So employees know that we're going to put this in as a control, or you're going to have to start doing this now. If that helps.
Yeah. Do you want to keep going, or Mary, do you have more questions? I didn't mean to interrupt.
So I guess part of what has me so confused on this whole matter is that we've been talking about this public works audit which is very similar to the credit card issue. And trying to get new policies put into place and close off all these items that were given to us that needed to be fixed. And we've been talking about this for years, and we've been told continuously that most of the items have been completed and put into place. There's a few that are still outstanding, like the purchasing policy, that we need to finally close. But for the most part, we've been told like this training that's been put in place, that all these things that are being mentioned now, new policies written. I have copies of draft policies that were actually written 2 years ago. So I guess that's where I'm confused, is I thought these were already in place, and now I'm hearing that you're working on it and putting it into place.
Are you talking about
And-
other policies besides the credit card one, or?
Besides the credit, but they were meeting policies or travel policies.
Yeah.
And so they're very similar to what you would have for a credit card.
They are on
The
place,
same.
right, they were in place. The problem is, in some instances, just so you know that, and again, I look at HR on this, because this should all be on onboarding. We need to have the employee, you're absolutely right. People coming in, whether they should know purchasing policy, they should know all these policies. And particularly if you're bringing in someone as a supervisor, right, particularly saying or promoting them, you really have to have that level of training of responsibility. So very good point in that. Right now, there was a travel meeting policy. It wasn't necessarily, I think in 2021, there was an email blast people were supposed to acknowledge receipt of the policy. It did not include, if you will, or reference the travel and meeting, the meal reimbursement policy piece was there. Not everybody had it. COVID hit, no one was traveling, right? So all of a sudden, people were putting submissions for out-of-state travel, and, people were like, what the heck is this? How do I do this? So that had to be refreshed and put in there and made employees aware of it. 2023, another email goes out with the travel and the meeting policy, say, hey, these are the limits. This is what you can do. And then we realized that looking at what I was seeing, people are still not quite understanding it and what they're supposed to be doing. So we went and we did tighten up the forms for reconciliation, making them with Jared, with Adam, making sure that people understood, you got to put these things in, you got to put your agenda, you got to put your meetings. So, and then we cross-referenced like the IT policy and the travel policy and other policies that would relate to that. And then shored up, hey, you just don't have a meeting because you want to have food. It's got to be a clear reason. Like, for instance, if you're training and if people leave, you're going to lose an hour of training because they have to go out and get lunch. And so you want to have them stay. And so you're right. So those are out. People have gotten training on those. We still have to get the other policies, HR, in my feeling, responsibility. That's why I have Power DMX coming in to make sure we have all these policies put out, making sure people get regular training, and that we are aware of problems. Like, I'm not completely familiar with the public works audit, but if there's things there that from the HR point of view needs to be done with our partners and other departments, you're absolutely right. So if you're saying you're confused, I think you're right. It's confusing when you don't have the rules and you don't have what's expected of you. And I am taking no fault to anyone with training, because it's a lot of work to get that out there and make sure. And, a lot of people are like, oh, I got my email, I got this. And I got to be honest, they don't read them sometimes. They don't. I mean, they get work down. They kind of think they're going to read them. And so it's really important to go through that training process.
Absolutely. I mean, to follow up, Mary, with you on that, I mean, when we came in, obviously, there was a lot going on around here. I was up at the Department of Environmental Protection 2 weeks in. And there was the fill pile, and there was the state's attorney asking for access to this building and to computers and files because they weren't given any before that. So there was a lot of activity, right? And then boom, I released the CFO and the HR director. They both get arrested, charged with multiple felonies. Then comes COVID. So there, you know, we weren't talking about policies or, you know, any of that stuff. Now, we were discussing the DPW audit because it had been done prior to us coming in, and that was getting chipped away. But there was really more focus on keeping the town of Fairfield's residents alive and managing the town government. So when the first travel policy comes up on my desk after COVID's over, it's from Mr. Bodie, and the policy in the town is that the first selectman would sign off, right? No, it's the first one I ever saw. And I think I don't remember what year it was, but 22 or something.
When I got here, 2022, yeah.
Yeah, so I get my first one, and I think it looks a little off.
2023, sorry, January.
Yeah, okay, so it looks a little expensive. So I went over to Jared and said, you know, can you have a look at this? Because this doesn't look like right to me. And what do I know? Because I've never seen one yet. But it did seem high. So, you know, Jared looks at it, talks with Kathleen. And so just to kind of give you a sense, we had set up a lot of trainings when we first came in, despite all the stuff that was happening with the investigation and the upheaval around here. We started setting up trainings, and we had a couple. And then pandemic hit, so all our trainings went out the window. We couldn't have them anymore because we weren't allowed to meet. But our intention was to do all these new trainings because it just was really so like glaringly obvious that this was like a rudderless ship, really. I mean, there was, you know, I'm not saying we didn't have good people working here. There just wasn't any, like, there was no management of this entire place. And so when you're looking at all these problems, you try to fix, you know, as many as you can as you go along. You can't, I mean, everybody, you know, you can only do what you can do. You got to fix what you have in front of you and then go to the next thing and try to fix that and then to the next thing. And then, but there was just so many. And COVID, it was, you know, like a grenade. So I mean, now I think you know, obviously I think that the HR department is the most professionally run we've had in this town. And they're doing their best, but to be honest with you, I think, with the level of professionalism that they're, managing in the office with the benefits manager, with the HR specialist, labor relations and, risk management and all of the stuff that they're doing. And I feel like with 500 employees, I feel like we still need another person in that department. They're just so underwater. I mean, one union can file 200 grievances in a week, and that whole department just goes like flat. So to your point, yes, there's trainings that we've been doing trainings, but there's so much more that needs to be done. And stuff that happened before, listen, I don't know who checked off the boxes on the credit card policy saying they were completed. I didn't check them off. I didn't see it. So I can't speak to it. And I'm not sure what that protocol was in the past. Was there a double check back with the audit subcommittee? You know, like, oh yeah, here's what we did and how we did it. I mean, I don't know how that works. But, you know, listen, I think we've identified a lot of things. We've tried to make a lot of changes. We did put this together for the committee. I think it's valuable. I think it's worthy, and we look forward to more input. I mean, I'll hand it out to you. If you
We're
want to
gonna
have a look.
Yeah, we're not done. We have more questions.
You could look at it too. I mean,
You're not gonna look at it.
We want to understand some things,
Thank
but
you.
okay, thank you. So,
Go
and
ahead.
this is, I don't know if this is a comment or a question, and I don't know if and maybe Kathleen wants to comment, maybe Ms. Saxel wants to comment, Mr. Schmidt wants to comment, but I appreciate everything you're saying about training and policies. I get it. I got to tell you though, looking at some of the findings, not just yours, but Ms. Saxel's, I'm not entirely convinced that people didn't know. Because if you look at the policies, let's face it, a lot of this is common sense. Don't use your card for personal things. Don't go to the gas station and fill up your tank on the town credit card. Don't change your oil on the town credit card. Don't go swiping the town credit card every day for lunch or throw parties in the office. I mean, these are pretty basic things, and people were told. And the reason I'm saying this is that I think while there may be some nuances here, and I'm not sure they were covered by the new policy, so I've got some questions on that. There may be some nuances and more complicated things. My belief is that the major problem here was nobody was checking this stuff. You know, because I may know that I'm not supposed to do all this stuff with my credit card, but if I go year after year, decade after decade in some cases, and no one ever says anything, why should I pay attention to a policy? So for me, and I do remember, and Ms. Saxel, I don't know if you remember this, but when this report came to us in 2020, the number one finding on it, most important finding, and it was first on the report, and I don't want to get it wrong, so let me just look here.
I got it right here.
But it basically said, an independent person does not review employee credit card expenditures. The top recommendation. What we were doing was leaving it to the department head to sign off, and as long as they signed off, these bills went flying through the finance department, got paid. No one ever checked them for compliance. To me, that's a bigger problem than training. It's a bigger problem than communicating these policies. Because you know what? Maybe I didn't read my email and I don't know that I'm not supposed to charge through, gas or birthday parties or whatever. But the first time I put my expense report through and I get dinged and I have to pay for that cost myself, I'm going to know. So to me, the issue was more so the fact that none of this was getting checked by anybody. Than the fact, or if they were checking it, they obviously were asleep at the wheel versus the fact that people didn't know. Now, there may have been some confusing things in there, but to me, this is an issue of resources in finance or who's ever accountable for this, because I'll be quiet in a minute, but I'm saying this because, again, it's not just credit cards. We heard a report a couple months ago that we've had contracts with vendors expired and the prices get jacked up and nobody notices. We just keep paying higher prices and no one notices. That's because there's no one there to check. We've had reports that, there've been bids for $500,000 and we're spending $1 million on the bid and no one, and it just sails through without anybody figuring it out. To me, the financial controls are the issue here, and I think they're more important and more pervasive to this stuff than the training. I'm not saying the training doesn't matter, but if we, I want to talk more about that, and there's some different pieces to it, but I view that as the biggest issue.
Fair enough, and that's a good point, and I think that, I agree, I think they're both really important. I think that you have to have both, absolutely. And you also have an HR department that actually will investigate and actually take
Yes.
this, and I don't publicize it, we've done quite a few investigations, we have done disciplinary action, people have left the town because of things we've uncovered since I've been here, and we've got that in place. So that's not, I'm not saying it's a good thing that we're trying to get rid of employee, but we're uncovering things, so we're addressing it and we're dealing with it. But you are absolutely right. If you don't have good controls and people just get lax, and I didn't say that I think some of them may have known or knew, hey, but it doesn't matter, it's different. I think that there wasn't proper notice. Do I think there were notice? Yeah, there was notice, and if they looked part there, and I think sometimes, like for instance, what I heard sometimes is like, well, it's like a past practice of doing it, and it's been going on for a long time, so.
That's my
Right,
point.
so it's the next time, and it sails through, so what we did do, and I think that looking at this thing with Jerry, we took that very seriously and put in things that had more teeth and controls. Jared's worked with that. Plus we have, I know in HR now, there are no excuses now. There's like, look, you've had your little, what called your time to, we're gonna give you some, leeway here.
Grace period.
Thank you, or something, or like, we're like when you paid amnesty. I didn't find, again, and maybe but what I looked at, what Ivana and Joanne looked at, it was like, okay, this stuff is questionable or whatever, but it wasn't like the big stuff that, I know little things can add up, I know that. But I was kind of looking at, are we committing fraud here? But again, whether it's not fraud or not, waste is waste. And if people are not looking at this stuff and saying, is there a better way to purchase it?
Yeah.
And that was, in the survey I found too, to your point, people are saying, I think there's other ways to, but I don't know. And some people are saying, well, the credit card's easier. you know, and, so they were guessing at things and that's not good either. So, yeah, so anyway.
Agreed.
I'm just gonna say,
Yes.
yeah, I agree.
And the reason I'm raising this again, because representations were made to all of us that these things were fixed, but
Yeah, okay.
Ms. Saxel, when you presented this to us, you said all these findings are important, but there's 4 that are really important. First one was that an independent person should be reviewing these credit card expenses. That never happened. Second one, cardholders who approve the purchases are not provided with training. Obviously, that really didn't happen. The third one you said was really important was that the list of credit card holders has not been reviewed by management to determine whether the number of cards issued is excessive or if cards are necessary. I'm still not sure that's happened. And then the last one you told us was one of the most important was consequences for violating the town credit card policy are not enforced. So this was 3.5 years ago. Those were your top things. And, it's unfortunate that that it took this long. But, I would agree with you. I think the review process, part of the reason I say this again, and I don't care how many times I say it, it's not credit cards. I believe these issues are pervasive. And the amount of non-credit card money that this applies to is much more material than credit cards. So.
And I think that's important for us to look at. And I just want to point of notice that, this report that Connie did that was shared with the audit subcommittee in February of 2020 was basically based on stuff that happened before my administration came in. So again, listen, I'm not trying to make excuses, but the pandemic, public corruption, the arrests, state's attorney, crawling all over this place. I mean, there was a lot of balls in the air. And frankly, when the state's attorney is, working with my administration and the DEP and the EPA, I think they take precedence over, checking to see if somebody has a credit card policy I know nothing about and if it was followed through with. So again, and a global pandemic. So we are doing, listen, we're here to be helpful. We put this together. I think it's important.
No.
Listen, I don't want to do the tit for tat. I'm here to talk about solution. I'm here to talk about solutions going forward. And if we think together, if the audit subcommittee feels that there are other areas, if you find some evidence that there are other areas besides this thing, which we didn't see, which I think we should all be grateful for, that there wasn't some really serious fraud going on with these credit cards, despite the fact there was really nobody watching it, which is a good thing. But I think if there is recommendations about other concerns, or there's some evidence of concerns about other areas where there is bigger dollars associated, then let's hear it.
Time out.
Let's have audits on it. I welcome every audit that you can think of. It would be wonderful.
I appreciate. I do think it's important for the public to understand that, and I get your whole COVID thing, but in March of 2021, this was presented to the full Board of Finance, this report. That's over 2 years ago. So we're trying to just understand, I think it's important for all the facts to get out there so we all agree and then we can move forward. That's what we want to do here.
No, I agree, John, but I don't serve on the Board of Finance. And so the bottom line is that we put this together about some controls and changes to this specific area. Now, Lori's mentioning something about, what did you say? Something about a contract that we had that we.
Yeah.
What is that?
One.
What is that about?
Well, before we get to that,
I don't know about this.
Well,
And I'm curious about it.
So I want to, and I'm not trying to pick a fight here. I really want to respond to this because I think it's important. Okay, number one, somebody should sit down with you and take you through the internal audits that we've heard about. Because forget about getting reports in the future. That's all fine and good. You need to be aware of some of the things that are reported, because if Mr. Schmidt's not been talking to you about that, or Mr. Bremer's not been talking to you about that, there's a lot of important issues out there that you should be aware of already.
But listen, we did talk about a lot about the DPW, but again.
But it's not DPW.
No, but I'm saying that was the largest one. That was a huge audit.
Okay, but my point is, yes, I think it's important that you be informed going forward. But
Absolutely.
I also think that if you're not familiar with what I'm referring to, then someone, and assume it's Mr. Schmidt, because Ms. Saxel reports to Mr. Schmidt, should take you through, at a minimum, some of the reports we've heard in the last year, because there are some significant items, and I think everyone will appreciate why this credit card thing is more pervasive. The other thing, and I'm just, for what it's worth, I'll tell you something that when you say, well, we couldn't think about audits because we had the public corruption and the fill pile and notices of violation, I get that. But I remember when this scandal first broke, and I read those police affidavits, and in them, they talked about, internal audits that threw up big red flags about this Julian arrangement years before it broke. Miss Saxel found, like monkey business with credit memos between Scott Bartlett and Julian. And I remember reading that and thinking to myself, how did anybody not connect the dots? Like, it was right there. Had someone pulled a thread, they could have figured this out. You also were involved in some analysis of, people falsifying the reports on the berm statements. I mean, so what I'm saying is that these things are important. It's not that, well, I was dealing with this, so the audits aren't important. Maybe you didn't mean to say that.
No, I'm not saying they weren't
I
important.
get you, but
But there's only so much bandwidth at a time. And when you walk it, listen, Lori, I am committed to doing the best job I possibly
I'm
can.
sure
do.
you are.
And the bottom line is, when you have a culture of corruption that's been going on for a real long time, you have to chunk it out, okay? Everybody's a human being. Now, if I want to hire, like you're saying, someone independent to review, I'd love it. I mean, if you want me to put that in the budget, I'll put it in the budget. I would love to have that. That would have been a great recommendation from this audit subcommittee. Hey,
I
Brenda.
think we
why don't
indicated
you
that
add
during the budget process.
another
We
person
indicated our willingness to.
These are things, I mean, you're talking a lot of layers of additional staff to do, because right now, I'm gonna say this honestly. Everyone right now who works in this administration is doing a lot of work. There is 18 departments, there are multitudes of problems, there are 62,000 people. There is a lot going on in this town, a lot of things. So listen, if there is some recommendation about adding some layers, adding additional staff to review all these things and make recommendations to your point, listen, some things are easier to see than others, and some things are really easy to see without an audit. You just see it. And you take care of it, and you remove people who shouldn't be there, not because of an audit or not because of anything. It's just because something's not right.
So I appreciate what you're saying, and maybe we have to do something like that, but I think from the Board of Finance's concern is when we get these internal audits and we're told that the recommendations are being dealt with, and then we find out a year or two later that nothing's happened, that's the concern that we have. And I think that's Mary's concern, and Lori's concerns, and all Board of Finance.
It's all of our concern, John, and frankly,
Get on top of
I
it.
wasn't aware of it, and I wasn't aware someone said things were handled. So I don't know who checked off any boxes, but again,
There's an audit on this internal audit, there's the auditee response, which is 14 of them that say we're taking care of these recommendations. And this was what was presented to us in 2021. So over 2 years ago, we were told this is all being taken care of, and here we are talking about it again. That's a problem. And we gotta stop, we gotta get on top of this, because you have to agree with that, because that's how the last administration got in trouble. And I appreciate what Kathleen's doing, and sounds like you're aware of it, but this is a problem, and we have to get on top of it. So that's the point.
To your, I think that's your right, like what having HR looking at, like, there's, for instance, saying that, I mean, that would have been a good place for a protocol saying, HR, look at this, because it looks like employees are up to some shenanigans, and it looks like there's going on. And, when they say that we're going to take care of something or consequences for employees, if HR is not involved with that, of course, the HR person at the time probably wasn't it's a bad example, but I mean, again, I'm just saying that that's part of HR. And now we have staff, we have bandwidth, we can do investigations, we can partner with the auditor and make sure that we know going in that they're, you know, if there's things that we need to look at and investigate, we can. So the point well taken with that. I mean, I'm
More questions?
Yeah, I still have some more questions on the summary. I mean, I have a few questions on the detail too, but I think there's a role for HR. I think the bigger role in some of these is finance. And I think there needs to be an expanded role for internal audit because we've been harping on this for years. And that's one of my questions on the next page, actually. So.
Can I just respond to?
Sure, of course.
You've said my name a few times. So change is hard. Like the transition is really hard. And one of the issues is definitely resources that's been brought up. We've done things. We've added a part-time grant coordinator. We've actually added staff, clerks for key information. We have didn't have one at the time, now have a phenomenal budget director. And as of a week ago or so, I now have a financial analyst. And so, but these things don't happen overnight. And, we're committed to making whatever changes we need to make. And that's why I put together this presentation for you guys to see where we were, what we've done, and what we still have left to do. But this is, just to do even this, it's a lot of work. And again, it's not, these things take time.
I understand.
We can't just do this
I
overnight.
understand, and this is part of why I'm raising this, Jared, because I don't think that a standalone solution of credit cards is really the main thing here. I think it's, how does this fit into the broader issue of what our financial controls are? Because credit cards are one thing, I see in the new policy, for example, you've got the lucky job of, I think, reviewing anything over $1,000 now. Is that
Approved.
right? So just as an example, that puts the burden on you to make sure that everything over $1,000 complies with, if it's supposed to be bid out or bids getting split. How are you going to know that? Like if somebody wants to buy 20 laptops and they funnel them through you one at a time, that now you're going to be pre-approving them. Again, that's not a good answer, right? The broader thing is credit cards are just one way to pay for things that we purchase. And the whole area, I think, and how we look at that and how we control it is a broader issue. But let me just.
Thankfully, a lot of those purchases over $1,000 are run through the more typical requisition process.
Because once we use a credit card, we bypass the entire purchasing process. And so then it becomes risky. And so that's why I raised this because, and I had asked this early on. I didn't get an answer, but this was one of the questions where I was not trying to be political. I was asking Kathleen, hey, I see this new MOU went out and I see this new process. How is that going to work? How's it going to work for someone like Jared to have that responsibility now? Is he's going to have a way to track that all these $1,000 purchases he's looking at, aren't just split between larger things? I mean,
there aren't a lot of those.
Okay.
There aren't a lot of those credit card purchases.
Well,
It's not.
I'll take your word for that.
However, appreciate that. So, however, I picked, we needed somebody to do it. And I said I would do it. I know I know the volume of them and I know there aren't a lot of them.
Okay. So, getting back to this whole thing, and there's a few things here, but on this second page of your executive summary, you say that, Kathleen,
I'm sorry.
Jared instructed, Ms. Saxel or we're trying to lighten her workload so she can actually do audits. And her workload was lightened to support this directive. And I just want to ask about that because I think last time, Ms. Saxel, you came before our committee, I think you told us at the moment you were spending something like 10% of your time on audits. So you were not doing many audits. And so is that changed now? Are you full-time on audits now or?
Well, right now, the burden of capital planning has been taken away from me. So there is some time that I can spend on internal audit in that respect. I have met with the Chief Fiscal Officer to discuss my current duties, and he's reviewing to see what tasks can be placed on other members of our finance department, or perhaps hiring new staffing to take on those tasks. But right
You're
now-
still doing,
Yeah, right now it's pretty much, the workload's the same except for capital planning. But
Yeah, I'll tell you,
it's in the process of getting reviewed.
okay, so currently you're spending how much of your time on audits, just out of curiosity?
Well, since the 990-page report came out, I just currently just have been focusing on audits. So I'm just a little, don't want everything else to get backlogged, unfortunately. So we're gonna have to talk about the workload.
So is there
so we're
a timeline that you're working toward to have Ms. Axel fully freed up to do audits?
We're continuing to look at her duties. One of the other things that Connie used to be in charge of was the auditing of any changes in contracts. And so in other words, when we have to review new contracts and figure out how much people are going to be making, and what the dollar amounts are, that Connie used to be in charge of that. Frank's taken that on. That has been, if Connie had to do that with the fire agreement alone, would have just, it would have taken up so much of her time. Frank has spent so much time, along with HR, has spent so much time on that. So that's another thing that's been redistributed to other people.
No, that's good. Do you have a goal date in mind?
We're also looking at reconciliations and redistributing those. And I'd also point out that even though some of her work is not audit reports per se, there are a lot of things that are compliance related and that are helpful toward that end, toward finding flaws, making sure that we're preventing risk and exposure. So those are also things that Connie does that are very important. We don't have a compliance officer, and so somebody else has to pick up that slack, and Connie's been doing that. So so we're continuing to work on that, and I don't have a specific timeline. I'm going to have to see how, as we talked about in the springtime during the budget process, I want to see how this works with the new employee and how long it's going to take them to get up to speed on capital plan, and reconciliations or whatever else gets redistributed.
Okay.
So we only have a couple of minutes. Did you want to look at all at this, or you're not interested in?
Well,
I think-
here's, we have some more questions, and then I absolutely want to go through this with everyone, and you prepared it, and I want to go through it. So if you need to leave, we can continue.
We said 90 minutes was all we had tonight.
Well, so let me
It's
just.
been good to kind of go through the
Well,
solutions.
Well, here, I'm totally in favor of having another meeting in the next week or so, and we can schedule it. I mean, so.
Well, we had Adam here tonight.
Items on the agenda, so we can.
So I thought it would have been helpful if we could have actually talked about the process. I had Adam sit here, Peter's here, they're here to talk about the process, the things we're doing to make changes, which I think is what our public really wants to know
So
about the controls.
let me just say something for that. I made it entirely clear in an email to Jared that we appreciate this, but that we had questions about the investigation and the process coming to today's date. And I suggested in emails to Kathleen, and I know you guys were copied on them, that if you're under strict time limit for for September 11th, let's pick some other dates and meet. And the response was there's no other dates in the foreseeable future. So I am perfectly willing. We have another item on the agenda. We can talk to Connie about that. It has nothing to do with this. And let's pick some dates in the next week or two so we can finish this. Because first of all, we haven't seen this until now, right? This wasn't part of the
No,
back.
we wanted to make a presentation.
We get it, but let us read it and then it'll be a better meeting when we meet again in the next week or so. So, because we'll have questions about this, I'm sure. And then hopefully we'll get through this and we'll be done with this and we can move on. So
Well, actually, I'd like us to, listen, I personally like us to meet, listen, I think it's great and there's a lot of schedules that have to be,
send an email.
again,
How's that?
that's perfect, and I'll work with my team, but I still think, John, aside from this specific issue, having another meeting, to talk about the results and some of the changes. I think it's helpful to sit down and roll up our sleeves and have real discussion, right, about some of the other items that, the subcommittee feels we can implement.
So let's-
We're looking to form solutions, and listen, if some of those ideas come out that we need to add staff in specific areas, that's something that helps me build the budget. And if I have the support of at least 3 Board of Finance members who want to, put in different staff to help us with controls, let's face it, right? Our town government has always been, let's run it lean, let's run it really, but you know what? There's some things you really need to have.
It costs us more to do things
I
the way we're
agree.
doing.
I 100% agree. And I think, a penny wise, pound foolish.
Yeah, you're making great points. So let's.
So you're gonna go to Connie now and then
Lori has one more question and then
I
we'll
do.
stop on this topic.
I mean, unless
Then we're gonna
Kathleen,
go
you
to
have to.
item
No,
number
it's okay. I just realized, it's fine.
we have till 7:30 and then Connie's gonna.
No, I know. I was thinking I have it 8 o'clock.
Yeah.
So I just, and I want to ask about this. So you included a lot of information, both in the backup and you spent a fair amount of your executive summary talking about the role of the internal auditor and this conflict of interest. And I guess I'm just wondering why this hasn't been cured yet. I mean, we identified this a long time ago. I mean, it seems like a fairly simple thing to do. Well, I don't know. I guess let me ask Ms. Saxel. You are president of the
Yes, currently I am the president of the Professional and Technical.
of PETA. Okay, and can I just ask you? I'm assuming that's a volunteer gig.
Yes.
You don't get okay. So I don't want to be. Is it as simple as you not having that role? Would that cure this conflict of interest? Because it seems like we've spent a long time and a lot of space on this. Have you had a discussion with each other about curing this or not?
No, we have not had any discussions regarding it.
Okay, well, I can, all right, I'm sorry, Connie, go ahead. I'll tell you what.
So I've been the president of the Professional Technical Union for about 5 years now. And as you all know, I'm also internal auditor for the town of Fairfield. It's a membership of about 49 people.
Okay.
Which is a little over 10% of the total town population. It's purely volunteer. I do not get paid for it. I have no personal gain from being president of the union, no financial gain. Have nothing to gain personally by not reporting a union member if I have a finding. No member.
But Ms. Saxel, to be fair, and I know you don't have anything personal to gain, but I understand Ms. Simpson's point that you could be in an untenable position if you have an audit that creates a potential disciplinary action with an individual, and then you're in the awkward position of also having to defend them. So whether or not you have anything to gain, that is call it a conflict of interest potentially. So I guess the question is though, and I know that this issue has been floating around for a while, Ms. Simpson, because you had raised this, I think, early on. And the reason I'm asking this is, Ms. Saxel's continued for the last however many, 6 months, 9 months since this came up to do internal audits. And why don't we just fix this? Is this an issue that we can just fix?
Problem, we have an ethics commission. Feel free, bring it to the ethics commission, have them provide an official ruling on it. I'm happy to abide by any ruling that they come up with. I certainly don't want to cause a conflict of interest with the town of Fairfield. My primary goal here is to do what's right and what's best for the town of Fairfield.
What do you say about that? Anything?
Well, we have to put the this full disclosure, charge was filed with the labor board, so I don't feel really comfortable talking about that right now. But I do think though that it's a conflict, but I want to work it through. We have to work it with the union. And yes, stepping down will cure the conflict, obvious. It's not that's an actual, there's nothing wrong with being in the union. There's also an issue of being an elected position in the union, which is also would be problematic. I'm not saying, Connie, it's just the appearance of impropriety. And that's it. And so now that we have this, it's a little harder, but we will point it out. And including with, I just want assurance here on the record that there's no way we're adjusting duties. We're not demoting Ms. Taxel, taking away money. That's not the point. She's got way too much to do. Probably could use at least 3 more of her to do her job. And so when we're aware of that, and I'm not at all, and Connie works very well with our office and is a very hardworking.
Okay, and the
So
reason I
can
wanted
see
to ask
that.
is you said in your report
Right now.
that you were reviewing the current auditor position.
Right.
And so I didn't know what that meant. So I, Ms. Saxel is one individual. She won't be here forever. Hopefully someday you'll move on to greener pastures in retirement or something, but it sounds to me like this. This is not a conflict with the position per se. It's just that Ms. Saxel happens to have this role in the union. And I just sat here and I said, why are we devoted so much time to talking about this and it just seems like it could easily be.
Well, there's a file now.
All right, I understand the issues. So just while we're gonna pick some new dates in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, you and I.
And pick up this topic. Is everyone okay with that? And members of the committee, we're gonna move to number 3, follow-up discussion, updates on internal
Yeah.
audit investigations. You're free to leave, I believe.
All right, yeah, thank you. I'm sorry to,
Jared has to stick around.
I'm sorry, my,
Around.
okay.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Connie, you can sit there.
Best of woods in the back.
But thank you very much, and thank you for putting up with my.
Jared, do you want a copy of
I have a event funding that in
What's that?
I have an event at 8.
Good time. All right.
Exactly. Good night.
Good night.
Are we closing the discussion regarding credit cards at this?
Yes, for now we.
Information, if I could, the document that Jared shared, is that gonna be available online?
You,
Where can we find
already
it?
get this online?
Yeah, I got an electronic version that I can share.
Put it on,
Yeah.
make it part of, the minutes for our meeting tonight and put it there, right?
Okay, because I understand a member of the press now has it, so I just want to make sure that the public is also getting it at the same time so we can understand
We
things.
just got it tonight too.
Yeah.
So we haven't even looked at it. And I'm looking forward to the presentation at our next meeting, finishing what we started and getting this presentation. So we're on item 3 now, follow-up discussion
Yeah,
update.
Mind if I, and maybe I'll ask Jared this, I meant to ask Kathleen, but this credit card investigation is completed, correct? It's done? There are no more related issues that are still being investigated somewhere else or?
Not that I'm aware of. I'm not aware of.
Okay. Sounds good.
All right, so, did we want to start with questions for Ms.
Did we-
Saxel?
is Adam?
He just left.
Okay. So
Go ahead.
I did have one follow-up question. So one of and this gets to my comment previously about, some of these issues being pervasive. So in our last committee meeting, we heard from you. There was one particular contract, but doesn't mean it's the only one. I think it was for the town payment processor, credit card.
Credit cards, yes.
And that was the issue that I alluded to before, where we had a contract that guaranteed pricing for 2 years. And then after 2 years, the contract was eligible for renewal. And it could go on, I think, for 5 years, but the pricing was no longer guaranteed, right? And so if I recall your comments correctly, what happened was the pricing expired. It went up. We just started paying the higher pricing and no one noticed it for a few years until a department head kind of complained about it. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And so the question I had, and this is the same as the credit card question, is who was supposed to have caught that? And I don't think we got an answer. And the reason, and twofold. One, who is supposed to check things like pricing before we pay any kind of bill? number one. And number two, do we have some kind of file in purchasing, or how do we track contracts that are, where pricing is about to expire, to make sure that this is not happening across the board? Because I do know from other issues we've discussed, we have contracts that have COLA provisions in them, that have all kinds of things where pricing is going to vary. And it just, from everything we've heard, it seems like, again, we are just relying on department heads. And as long as they sign off, the payments go sailing through. And it's, you know, we heard about these two specific ones that you found, but I didn't hear anything about a process being changed. So that was the item I wanted to follow up on.
Well, the biggest contracts fall under Department of Public Works Operations, and they used to have a contract manager that worked there. And her sole goal at that department was to look at every single contract and ensure that every invoice that came in, the pricing agreed to the awarded contract. And if not, she would contact the vendor and have the pricing corrected.
And what was that position again?
It was called contract manager.
Contract manager, but this was only in DPW.
That was at DPW. Other contracts, however, fall under the director of purchasing. In their department, they track them within their department and ensure that when the contract expires, that either the contract is renewed or not.
But they don't ensure that because they missed this one that you've.
So what
Supposed to.
I had contacted the director of purchasing and I said, this contract is expired and the pricing is now, has gone up and it's varying across the board throughout all departments. And he agreed, and realized that it had indeed done that. And I had recommended to go out to bid. This is for a credit card processor. So this way you could get uniform pricing and you know exactly what you're paying for every credit card in town.
And not to interrupt, I
Not
get
to
that, I get that part, but that's for this one contract.
Right.
So I guess when I hear that a contract expired or pricing expired and no one knew about it, I'm trying to understand what's the mechanism in purchasing or elsewhere to, do we have, a list that says, in January, these 5 contracts expire, like
I
what?
would imagine, I can't speak for the director. of
The only,
purchasing, but
I can give one example, the auditor contract, okay? It's up every 5 years. The committee knows a year ahead of time, we're planning, we've got to go out for an RFP, who's the list of people, and we go through the process, right? I know it's only one thing, and obviously the town has many of these, but it didn't seem that there was a mechanism to track this across the board. And I'm not sure it's only DPW. I think it was Parks and Rec that had the
Yes, it was-
Greenway Property
I think it was
Services
the lead
contract with
pickup
all
that
sorts of
going-
price escalations in there. And it seemed like the departments were signing off on this stuff, but there wasn't a separate validation. So that's kind of, and maybe for Jared too, this is one of the concerns. So who is checking this stuff? Who's responsible for knowing when contracts expire? And even if they don't expire, if they have escalations for inflation or whatever, which many of them do apparently.
It's a combination
out?
of purchasing, director of purchasing and the department head.
Yeah, and I understand. I get your concern, but.
And wherever the responsibility lies, we know it's not happening consistently. And this was same thing came up in the DPW audit. So if we know this is a problem, this is one of the things, Jared, that I think is consistent with the credit cards, which is that when payments are made, who is responsible not only for saying, these guys mowed the lawn, but are we paying the right amount? Because that's where the breakdown seems to be.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that the contract manager at DPW was that position, those responsibilities, at least the contract management pieces of that were primarily absorbed by the assistant director. And so he's the one who's supposed to be doing that, whether it's, so I don't, in that particular situation, I don't really see a difference in whether it was a contract manager or the assistant director. That said, I understand what you're saying. I think these are, I think it's a leap to think that, okay, these problems are all over the place. I wouldn't make that leap. I think the department heads, and purchasing are, even though there may not be a specific procedure or process in place, that these things are happening and they're aware of them.
Yeah, I would just say, from where I come from my employment, the issue we have sometimes with contracts we enter into in vendors is, for example, a lot of these vendors are supposed to carry their own insurance and name the municipality and insured. And guess what? You look at it and they don't do it, and there's problems later on down the road if there's some litigation. So, I mean, I think we really need to look at some type of a policy in place that addresses the issue Lori is saying, the insurance issue, and maybe we do already for risk management. I just,
You definitely do.
we do, okay. That stuff, with everyone so busy doing things, can easily fall through the cracks. And so I think it's important that come up with some way to monitor and track both issues. That's my 2 cents.
I mean, we require, sort of insurance and
Yeah.
the RFPs that we do.
Yeah. But sometimes contracts go on for more than a year and no one follows up to see if they've maintained the insurance, just as an example. I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, that's, I mean, Mary, did you have a? No. Yeah, I think, listen, if we learned anything from the Phil Pile situation, it's that trusted people sometimes, do things they shouldn't be doing. And just because someone's a department head and they're signing off on something, doesn't mean that should be the sole, that's what's gotten us in trouble. I mean, even with credit cards, whether it's because they made a mistake or they didn't know, or they're not paying attention, or these other contracts, my main concern is the financial control to make sure that, before a check goes out the door from the town of Fairfield, someone is making sure that this is correct. And I think the department head certainly has a role in making sure the services have been provided. But when it comes to, is there a valid bid attached to it? You don't remember what happened with the whole Owen Fish thing, right? We somehow managed to get payments out on bids that had been expired, or a bid that had been expired for years. To me, these are the types of things that pop up when you don't have any kind of centralized control in finance or somewhere to make sure this stuff happens. And Jared, maybe you're right. Maybe it's not pervasive, but the last several audit reports, this is the kind of stuff that's been coming up. And so if we're finding this sort of thing every time we look, then I tend to think it may be happening more than you want to believe. So, especially for contracts that are not just flat rate, the audit contract's easy. It's a fixed fee. You can figure out how much you paid and that's it. These ones that have a big pricing schedule for all different types of services, inflationary adjustments and all that stuff, I'm just not convinced that we've got it. So I would say that this is the area, just like credit cards, that needs the deep dive. And Connie, are there any, in terms of the other audits that you've done this year, I know one of the ones we had a number of concerns about was the transfer station and all those things. Have you, you were going to go back, I think, have those been resolved?
I did a follow-up at the transfer station. I did write a report. It's in draft still. I did meet with Mr. Marsilio, the interim director of DPW operations, administration, and also John Cattell, his assistant. I met with Jared. We spoke about the findings of the report. They're currently reviewing the report and they're writing a response to me regarding it. Actually, that response from the auditee is due on September 13th. So once I get that, hopefully to finalize that, and that would be distributed to the audit subcommittee and Board of Finance.
And can I just ask, because the last report, and maybe this is a question for Jared, but the last report, the response was, we don't agree with you, kind of go away. So I guess when that happens and we have, and this was not a factual agreement on what was happening or not happening. This was a disagreement between surrounding the recommendation. So I don't know if that happens very often. It seems like generally you've always told us they agree and they agree to implement it. Whether they do or not is a question, but they agree to implement it. When we have a disagreement like that on the recommendation, I don't know if this one, they're going to finally agree or not, but how does this get, so, you know, who
Not
arbitrates
every
it?
recommendation that I make, I always tell people, look, I'm not Moses, this is not cast in
Right.
stone, it's for management's consideration. So there are times when
Yeah, we've seen
management
those, yeah.
chooses not to agree or follow up on my recommendation, and at that point in time, management accepts any possible risk associated with not complying with that recommendation.
Okay, and I just want to distinguish what I'm saying, though. So I think there's two things, right? You may make a recommendation and you might say, we should have this control in place. And, you know, management may say, you know what, it's going to cost us more to implement that control than the risk. You know, it's not worth it. We're putting a $100,000 fence around a $10,000 problem. We don't think it makes sense.
Yes.
Okay, that does happen, right?
Mhm.
So that's one thing. I guess I'm more referring to when there's just, it's not really a cost benefit thing, but I'm thinking of that transfer station issue where it was just a pure disagreement on the recommendation versus, and I'm just trying to understand if we have, how does that get?
Decide.
Yeah.
Well, so I don't want to go into the details of that.
Not that, no, process-wise, yeah.
And aside from that, I'm not aware of any other areas where there's been an outright, like, we
Disagreement.
don't agree and we're not going to do this. And
Believe it or not,
even in that situation, there's not an outright.
when we did meet regarding the follow-up, I believe there was at this point in time a meeting of the minds, and I felt like perhaps management was willing to adhere to the recommendations. That was my impression as we left the meeting. And they're still reading the report and writing their response to me. So.
And sometimes it's a matter of finding, they may have a better alternative.
Right.
They know their operation better than we do. So we may be recommending one thing and they say, oh, wait a minute, and that actually happened in this case with the transfer station where they came forward with another way of doing it that may not cost money, but still allows us to implement the control that we need.
Exactly it. Yes, and at that meeting, I said, I am not the expert of the solid waste and recycling facility. I have to rely on their areas of expertise as well. And if they feel that they have a way of doing things better than I can recommend, I'm certainly open to any suggestions that they can make.
No, I appreciate that. The reason I think that one stuck out to us was that was a specific recommendation in the DPW audit report. So it wasn't just your personal recommendation, and it was called out in that report as something that we needed to keep in place. And I think that, to your point, when there are different views on how to get things done, I feel like that, I'm assuming that if you hear that, you may modify your recommendation before the report's printed.
Well, what I actually, Mr. Cattell did come to me and he had some questions, and I said, you know what, write your response and we will attach it to the back of the report. I'm going to keep my recommendation as it stands. Please write your response, how you perceive my recommendation, how you feel it can or cannot be implemented. And that way you get both sides. You'll see internal audits review and my take on this recommendation. And you also see the other side management's response. So that's how we left it at that. Because I don't really want to change the report. I want to keep it as it is, and I want you to see both
Sure, yeah.
internal audits, recommendations, as well as what management also recommends. So let's start from the beginning. There was a GovDeals audit, which is basically, that is an outside auction house that we use to auction goods, basically cars, machinery, equipment. So that one's still in draft. I'm awaiting auditee response. It's due actually tomorrow. So I'm hoping that can be finalized tomorrow or at least sometime this week. I also did an audit of cash and check deposits for Recreation Department, Smith Richardson, Carl Dickman Golf Courses. That draft report is still in progress. I still have one open item that I want to I'm still looking into, and I just want to make sure that's closed out properly before.
Cash and check deposits. Yeah, we want to hear about that.
I want to, and you, obviously Connie will continue. I just want to summarize that their Connie's reports are all in draft form.
Yes, this is a draft.
We are, for various reasons.
This is just topics that you
Did or didn't do.
No, when I write the draft report, it goes through various review
When
processes.
you're done, we have a presentation of.
Yes. So I just want to let you know what I'm working on. They're still in progress. For that.
The audits are completed. You're just waiting on
Right.
finalizing. Report.
Correct, right. We spoke about the solid waste. I also did a petty cash audit per the request of the CFO, Jared Schmidt. So that is currently in the review stages at this time. I also just completed a recreation checking account audit where they maintain their own independent checking account at Recreation Department. And I just completed that audit. I just received a reply from the department head regarding that, so I believe we can finalize that sometime this week as well. I just sent it to Jared. The department head's okay with it. Jared's in his review process. And I'm currently in the process of writing a tax collector audit report. I went to the tax collector's department and reviewed their cash collections, deposits, manner of issuing taxpayer refunds. I'm currently in the process of writing that report and also collaborating with the town tax collector, Mr. Klazewski, and closing out some open items on that report. And that's where we stand. So there's 6 all in draft form at this
Since
time.
we met with you in June?
No, they were in progress. They were throughout the months. In June, they were still in draft. They're still in draft today, but I'm hoping to close them out.
Good job with the tax collectors last night.
Is that did I? I never can get that right.
Send that to the full.
Yeah, the full board, I think, usually in January.
Yes.
Although maybe we'll do that earlier.
So maybe we can have.
So that there's 6 of those. I'd hate to bombard you with, a series of audit reports because there are findings and recommendations.
If you wanna shoot me an email when you have some of them done, maybe we can have a.
Right. And do.
You're 3 of them.
Right,
instead of all
yeah,
6
yeah,
of
I
them.
think that's better because it's just too much information.
Yeah.
So let me know.
Yes.
And I think the only thing I would say, and the reason I think I wanted to ask about these other ones is, again, I feel like, and I'm not trying to be critical, but I feel like sometimes we, again, look at this finite issue and then we're not really addressing, not kind of pulling the thread. So this issue with the payment processor,
Right.
we can go out to bid because now we've been paying higher prices, but that's not really the issue. The issue is that this escaped notice for 3 years. And so, I just want us to have the emphasis on saying, what was the process issue? And what are the implications of this? And,
Right.
Because all of them, it's very rare in my experience that anything's an isolated incidence. If it's happening once, it's usually there's a reason for it, and it's happening in other places too, because you have a process breakdown. So, yeah.
Can I discuss the issue of the compliance with the February 2020 credit card audit report, or we want to hold off on that?
Well, wait a second. No,
Do you want to wait?
It's up to you.
I think we need to wait
Okay.
until we meet again.
Okay.
Because in fairness, we said we were gonna pick that up, so
Okay.
let's talk about that when we.
Okay.
Next meeting, we're gonna, as I indicated,
Open items.
on the record 25, 30 minutes ago, We'll get dates. Hopefully we can do something in the next 2 weeks or so, if everybody's okay, and, we'll pick up and look forward to hearing the recommendations from town. Jared put those together, and, we'll finish our questions first and get the presentation. In the meantime, we can review it.
Yeah.
And we'll have questions about that, I'm sure, too. I have a few more questions on, the credit card issue too, and particularly the fraud policy. There's some
Yeah.
things that I think are issues with it that I think we need to address, which will make it better for the entire town too. So
Can I just 1 minute on the,
Yeah,
on the
go ahead.
presentation, just so you know
Mhm.
the concept where it's coming from, and, you know, I thought it was important to put the actions that we're doing, you know, the action and whatever the new processes we're putting in place against something. And so I was looking for a good package of best practices, and from my previous job, I know I was very familiar with some work that Washington State does, and there's a lot of other, they do it for their municipalities, but I know that a lot of other states go to them and look at what they're doing, because a lot of what they're presenting isn't necessarily specific to their municipalities. It's global, and so I picked that one. I did ask CCM to see if they had something similar for Connecticut. They said they didn't. They gave me a few policies, not draft, but sample policies from other towns. But you know, that's not really what I was looking for. I was looking for something from somebody who is more of an authority on the topic. And so I picked that one. I had Joe Centofanti take a look at it, and he kind of gave his blessing. I left some quotes in there from him just so you understand that it may seem kind of weird. Well, why are you going to Washington State? And those are the reasons, and there's a lot of credibility to the work that they do.
No, that's good.
We'll have a good discussion at our next meeting about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and listen, we may have some input. We all use credit cards or did at our employer. I mean, I know with, what I've been used to is I never had, I was liable for my own credit card. The only way it got paid to American Express is if I input it on a T&E report. So anything I didn't report with all the required information just didn't get paid, and then I had to pay it separately. So I think, and obviously we had a more sophisticated technology solution than the town has. So there's some things to think about there. But I think for, 35 years of having, a business credit card, I never had a situation where it was just paid by the organization. It was, you were always liable for your own charges. And then you would either get reimbursed from your employer once you submitted the documentation, or they would pay it once you submitted the documentation. So that's what I'm used to. And so I don't know, I'm not sure this is a town thing per se. I think it's, just what are the best practices for how, these types of things are managed. And I think there are lots of things to look at, but I look forward to reading this. And if I could just ask one, random question, because in the backup, I saw an example that triggered this question, but I think it was, I don't know if Kathleen used this as an example documentation for an expense report, but what was in there was, an example of documenting why you bought gas at a gas station. And it said, I'm on my way to a conference, so I filled up the tank and it was $55. I guess, do we have a mileage reimbursement policy in the town?
Yes, we
Okay,
do.
so we should never be having people putting through their charges at a gas station, okay? That struck me as really bizarre, because that looked like an example that we were giving out to employees. And so I really wondered why we would do that. What do we give out, X cents a mile for business
We
travel?
reimburse employees in accordance with IRS
I thought
guidelines.
so. Okay.
You have a question there, Mr. Wong?
Personal use.
I went through that and I
Yeah.
thought that had to be an error, because
Yeah.
the person in that example was taking the mileage reimbursement.
And filling up the
Also
tank?
paying like charging gas.
Okay.
You need to do one of the other.
Yes, yes.
I know some employers allow you to say you can pay for the gas. You know, get mileage reimbursement.
Right.
I thought that example on that page of that report was an error, so I
Yeah.
think maybe we want to get it before the whole.
And I don't know if we were
You
looking,
can ask that
maybe we were looking at a different one. The one I was looking at looked like it was a sample that was
Yes.
being given to people for
Yeah.
an example of how you should
That's the
document things. Okay.
We do have a travel and meeting expense report where you would put the date, where you had traveled to, how many miles, and we would reimburse you in accordance with whatever the reimbursement.
And
rate is
for meals, we have a per diem policy. So if I go to a conference and I want to buy dinner, I get, whatever the amount is,
Yes, we
right?
have that as.
I can't sit there and say, gee, it was at a fancy hotel, so it
Right.
sort of is what it is. Okay, so we have the per diems, we have a
Yes.
mileage policy. And I would assume that that comes into play pretty infrequently anyway, because we don't
Right, depends,
probably
yeah,
do tons of travel.
right.
It didn't, as Brenda mentioned, during COVID, there was nothing going on, and that's why, after the travel was allowed more, that it became more of an issue for us because we, since the new administration took over, there was almost no travel at all. And so then we had to adjust because things opened up again.
Okay, thank you.
All right, look forward to the next meeting. Motion to adjourn. Everyone,
Aye.
all in favor? Aye. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Honey,
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Jared.
thanks, Jared.
everybody.
Ryan.
Thanks, Caitlin, for coming.
Thanks, Caitlin.
Thanks, anything.
Really fun. Barrel of laughs.